Bite of the Mango, Chapter 2. Palm oil is a vegetable oil that comes from the palm tree. It's deep orange in color, and in Sierra Leone, we use it to cook most of our food. Whenever you dream of palm oil, my grandma had told me when I was 7, blood will spill by the end of the day. I dreamt a lot about palm oil when I was growing up, and sure enough, whenever I did, I'd cut myself playing tag with my friends or scrape my knee. But on our first night in Manarma, I had my worst dream ever about palm oil. I was standing in a big pit in the ground. It was full of palm oil, which came up to my knees. Beside the pit stood a tin drum we kept full of fresh lake water for the family. The wooden legs that held up the drum were on fire. The water inside was boiling. Steam rose from the drum spouts into the clear blue sky. The wooden legs began to sway and the drum keeled over. As it fell, the drum turned into my head. In the dream, there was no water inside, only palm oil. And as my head fell to the ground, the thick oil coated my body from head to toe. I woke up screaming. I had been sleeping on the floor on a straw mat beside a damsey. There were about 15 of us in the room, including the family who owned the hut. Marie and Ali, a damsey, Muhammad, and Ibrahim. It was early in the morning. The sun was just beginning to show through the windows on the other side of the room. My scream woke Ali, and he glared at me. I began to shake. I knew he'd be angry at me for making a noise. We'd been told we'd know when the rebels were getting close because we'd hear gunshots. That's why we had to be very quiet. I was afraid Ali would beat me because my scream had been so loud. Ali was a big man. When we kids didn't do what he asked, he liked to show us how strong he was by grabbing a tamalangba and beating us hard. Marie slept soundly beside him, and as my uncle's piercing brown eyes burned right into me. I worried I was about to get it. Then someone else in the room stirred. "Try to be quiet," Ali hissed. "You'll get us all killed if you don't." He glared at me again, then laid his head back down on the mat. I breathed a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat from my brow. The room was already getting hot. I rolled on my mat, smoothed out the cotton dress I slept in, and went outside to see who was awake. I didn't tell anybody about my bad dream, at least not right away. Once I had a look around, I followed a woman I didn't know to the nearby river. After I washed my face, ran some water over my braided short hair, and brushed my teeth with a chewing stick, which was just a twig from a tree, I began helping her wash clothes. I was carrying a plastic jug of water back to the village when Ali approached me. I thought, no, this is it. I'm afraid for my beating. Instead, he said he needed me to go and get some food from Magbaru. I wasn't sure I heard him correctly, so I politely asked, "What is it you want me to do?" "I want you to go to Magmaru with Madamzi, Ibrahim, and Muhammad and get some food from the storage bin," he said. I was shocked. I stood absolutely still, and droplets of water from the jug on my head dripped down my face and back. What kind of man sends children back to a village that rebels are about to attack? I thought to myself. "There are some others going with you," Ali pressed on. "Some men from Manarma. You will be safe with them." The image from my dream flooded back. I did something children are never supposed to do in Sierra Leone. I looked Ali, an elder, straight in the eyes, and I then went further and did something that was almost certain to result in a beating. I spoke back to him with a confidence I didn't know I had. I replied, "No, I don't want to go." I decided to lie and say I wasn't feeling well. "You've been washing clothes. I saw you by the river, and now you're fetching water," Ali said. "You're not sick. You go to Magbaru and get the food with your cousins." "I'm not going anywhere today," I insisted, shaking head to toe. I told Ali about my dream and my grandmother's prediction. "Something is going to happen today," I said. "It will be bad. If you don't believe me, I will go, but we might never see each other again." I thought he'd yell at me, but he chuckled. "Just go. I'm sure nothing is going to happen." I walked back to the house where we'd slept and set the water jug down beside Marie. I began to cry when she too told me I must go. There's nothing to worry about, she reassured me. The rebels have never come yet. I'm beginning to think they're not even real. So do what Ali asked. Go to Megbaru. She was still crying as I left Manarmo with Damzi, Ibram, and Mohammed. All I could think about was my dream, the palm oil, the burning water drum, and my grandmother's words. Whenever you dream of palm oil, blood will spill by the end of the day. We never reached Megbaru. On the way, we had to pass through another village, and as soon as we entered it, we heard gunshots. A woman in the road said not to worry. According to her, the gunshots were likely the local villagers, who kept watch day and night for the rebels. They're just practicing their shooting, the woman explained, but I could tell she was nervous. Her brown eyes were big as saucers, and she spoke in a hushed tone. About 10 of us had set out for Megbaru from Manarma. The older men in our group decided we should wait until the gunfire ended before continuing on. I grew quiet. I was certain something terrible was going to happen. I stood close to Muhammad and watched as a village woman made fufu, a meal of boiled cassava. The woman invited us to eat some, but I couldn't take more than a few bites. I was too afraid. When we couldn't hear gunshots anymore, the men announced they wanted to send Adamsi and me back to Manarma, just to be safe, said a man I didn't know. The salesman who went from village to village selling cooking supplies like onions, pepper, fish, and oil came up to me. He asked me to take some palm oil back to Manarma. I placed a yellow plastic jug on my head, and Adamsi and I set off. I dreaded every step. When we reached the outskirts of Manarma, we paused underneath a mango tree near the soccer field, our hearts pounding. We couldn't see or hear anybody, which was very unusual. But I tried to explain away to lack of village activity. The chairman of Meguru would put in place a curfew at any time of the day or night whenever he felt we were at risk. The curfew meant everyone had to stay indoors. Then we saw them, coming out of one of the houses, soldiers of some sort, bare-chested, wearing khaki pants with bullets wrapped around their muscled bodies. Adamsi began to run away, but a man came from nowhere and caught her by the waist. He carried her back and threw her down in the dust beside me. We wore a red bandana around his head and had several guns slung around his shoulder. I froze. This is it, I thought. Today is the day the rumors of rebels proved to be true. The soldiers ordered me to take the palm oil from my head. Behind him, I could see why everything was still. The soldiers had taken over the village. They were going in and out of all the houses, looting them from people's possessions. They tossed most of the items onto a pile in the middle of the road. Another soldier joined the first one, and the two pushed us into the village, into a spot by the side of the house. They ordered Adamsi and me to sit side by side on the ground. One of the men tied our hands behind our backs with a piece of scratchy rope. Do you know who we are? He asked with a toothy grin. No, I said. Are you the soldiers protecting the village? I knew they weren't, and that was the wrong answer. He started yelling at me. There are soldiers here? Where are the soldiers? We are the rebels. We want to catch these soldiers. Tell us where they are. By now, many of the rebels were coming up to us. They poked their faces into ours and then walked away, wearing hideous smiles. Many were speaking to each other in Creole, the most common languages in Sierra Leone, which I recognized but did not understand. The rebel who tied my hands started interrogating me in my language, Temne. Where do you come from? How old are you? Before I could answer, I spied the palm oil salesman. My mouth hung open. I had no idea why he had turned back toward Manarma, since he had been headed to Megbaru. The rebel who spoke Temne turned to Damsi and me and said, Don't close your eyes. We watched as the salesman ran down the dirt road, only to be shot in the stomach by a rebel who appeared in front of him. The rebel looked no older than I was, so the chairman had been right. I realized when he had said some of the rebels were children, I started to cry. I had never seen anyone die before, let alone be killed, but the rebel said he would kill me if I didn't stop crying. Don't be a baby, he commanded. I let big girls live. My cousin started begging him to let her go. Damsey was always a talker, but I was shocked that even in the face of danger she kept chattering. Just sit and watch everything, the rebel spat, slapping her in the face, forcing her into silence. If we set you free, we want you to tell other people about what you've seen here. Then everything began to happen fast, too fast. I heard voices coming from the house behind me. The rebels had blockaded the doors and windows with big wooden planks. Inside, one of the rebels told me were about 20 people. A single voice stood out, that of my friend Mariatu. She was wailing, calling for help, trapped with the others. My eyes darted away from the house to a terrifying sight. 2 rebels were shoving Ibram and Mohammed up the road toward us. They were punching the boys in the back to get them to move faster. When my cousins were directed in front of us, the rebels grabbed them both by the neck and pushed them down hard into the dirt, using their gun barrels. The rebels nudged the boys until they were back to back. They then tied Mohammed and Ibram together. Next, the rebels forced the boys to stare up into the blinding noonday sun. "Are you the soldiers watching the villages?" One rebel yelled at them. "Are you the soldiers? Are you the soldiers?" he shouted over and over again. Mohammed and Ibram shook their heads, but the rebel wouldn't relent. The boys started crying. Ibram had wet his pants, and I watched the stain grow. I had to look away when the rebel began waving a knife around their bare backs and scalps. I tried to find somewhere my eyes could rest, but the first place they landed was back on the house. 3 young rebels, no older than me, were walking alongside it, brandishing torches and set that thatched roof on fire. Everyone inside started to scream as the fire became an inferno. A woman with a baby tied on her back managed to punch through the wooden planks blocking one of the windows. The baby had curly black hair and big eyes that were looking all around. One of the young rebels threw down his torch and grabbed the machete slung on his back. In one violent swoop, he chopped off the woman's head. The baby wailed as the woman's body fell back into the house on top of him. Her head rolled onto the road toward me. I started to cry again, and my body convulsed. "Do you want to join them?" the rebel watching over me threatened. Part of me did. After a while, the screams died down. Silence descended. All was quiet as the smoke from the fire in the house rose to the sky. Rebels were now streaming out of the bushes, coming to join those who had taken over the village. There were so many, in front of me, beside me, in back of me, that I couldn't count them all. If I had to guess, I'd say there were more than 100. Most of the late arrivals were kids. The older rebels shouted orders to younger ones. The boys would stop and listen, then resume their pillaging of the remaining houses. Straw mats, baskets, rugs, wooden chairs, tables, and clothes were tossed onto the giant pile on the road. The same boys who had burned down the house with Mariatu inside waved their torches along the bottom of the pile, igniting a huge bonfire. At first, I didn't recognize Salier, the man who wanted to marry me, as 2 young rebels pushed him toward an older one for instruction. Salier's face was bloody, his shirt torn, his hands were tied behind his back. I gasped when he looked over at me. The older rebels shouted something. The younger 2 ones grabbed hold of Salier's arms and marched him forward. The rebel who spoke Temne shouted at me, "Do you recognize this man?" Yes, I shuddered, my eyes glued to Salier. "Good," the rebel smiled. "This one is for you. Watch closely." The rebel stepped back and shot Salier in the head and stomach. As the younger rebels dragged Salier's body away, a sound hit me with a jolt. Music, loud music, but not the African music I was used to. I couldn't understand the words of the song, and the beat was very different. Some of the men were dancing to the music. Girls not much older than me passed around what looked like cigarettes. As the smoke from the long paper reefers floated toward me, though I didn't recognize the smell. The girls handed around cups full of palm wine, when the rebel men gulped down quickly like water. As they drank and smoked, the men's eyes became red and wild, darting back and forth, not really looking at anything. A couple of the men grabbed the girls' waists and kissed them as they passed. I had never heard of girl rebels before, but there they were. They wore the same combat pants and the red bandanas as the boys and men, and a few of the girls carried guns and had bullets wrapped around their bodies in a similar fashion. "Do you know these people?" The rebel by my side yelled as 5 boys pushed a woman and man toward me. The woman and her husband were from Magbrew. She was pregnant, days away from giving birth. The man was her husband. The woman's bare, mud-caked feet were scraped along the ground. Her face was ashen, and black circles lined her eyes. She was obviously exhausted. Her body was hunched as if she were about to topple over. The boy rebels propped her up as she held her very large stomach with her hands. "Don't do this, don't do this," the man cried out to the boy rebels. "I will give you anything I have. I will go with you and kill whoever you want. Just let my wife live." But the boys ignored his plea. "We don't take people anymore," one of them screamed at the man. "This is our last attack before Port Loco, so anyone we capture, we kill." One of the boys pointed his long rifle at the man's back. 2 others forced the man into a kneeling position on the ground facing his wife. In front of us all, and in front of her husband, they killed her and the baby she was carrying. "Do you like what you have seen?" one rebel asked me. Marie had told me once about the rumor she had heard. When a rebel kills, they make the person watching say they enjoyed it, or else the person will be killed too. If you ever get into that position, always say you like what you see, no matter how bad it gets. So I replied to the rebel, "Yes." "Good," he pats back. "We may keep you alive after all." The rebel guarding us grabbed a damsel by her braids and yanked her into a standing position. He shoved her into the arms of another rebel, who spun her around and dragged her by the hair down the road. I saw her, like a shadow, being pushed into the doorway of a house on the other side of the bonfire. "Goodbye," my heart said to her. "Goodbye."